This is Danny Bobrow, President of AIM Dental Marketing, welcoming you to this installment of the Practice Perfection Web-Based Education Series. Today's webcast is titled, Discover Revenue Opportunities and Plug Profit Leaks, and will, as with last month's event, be presented by Rick Willeford, MBA, CPA. Rick was a dental CPA for 40 years. He has been an avid writer for dental economics and is an internationally sought-after speaker. After he sold his CPA practice, he immediately dusted off his electrical engineering degree from Georgia Tech to develop DentaMetrix, a professional-grade data extraction and dashboard program for consultants, DSOs, experienced practice administrators, and, of course, dentists. The combination of his knowledge of leading-edge technologies, his deep dental business experience, and his understanding of the practice management side of dentistry give him a unique perspective to enhance revenues and plug profit leaks in a practice. As an attendee of today's presentation, you will learn why net new patients is key, find out how much you are leaving on the table with PPOs and what to do about it, and distinguish between being busy and productive with production per visit, and be exposed to several interesting measures of how well you are managing your practice's back door. Rick will demonstrate how to use key performance indicators to unlock the secrets in your practice operations and patient management. We will walk through a profit leaks analysis to learn how to use KPIs proactively and learn about some vital KPIs you may not have seen before. For most solo practices, the analysis reveals anywhere from $700,000 to $1 million in potential profit leaks. Today's event will run for around 90 minutes. While attendees are in listen-only mode, we invite all of you at any time to submit your questions or comments using the question button on your screen. We will allow time following the presentation to get your questions answered. If we do not get to your question during the webcast, we'll see that it's answered shortly thereafter. Attendance at this presentation entitles you to apply to receive 1.5 hours of continuing education credit. Shortly following the webcast, we will send you an email with instructions for receiving your CE. Please note that the code for this course is WIL 052622. That's WIL 052622. You will need this code to request your CE, so please be sure to write it down. And now, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome back to the Practice Perfection stage my friend and colleague, Mr. Rick Willeford. Hello, Rick.
Hey, Danny. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing great. Glad to have you back.
Yeah, well, I'm excited about tonight. You know, the great football coach Vince Lombardi said, if you're not keeping score, you're just practicing. So tonight I want us to look at some interesting scorekeeping measures you perhaps have not thought of before. Everybody knows to determine production, collection, things like that. But let's get beyond that and do some analysis of why and what these KPIs mean. But first, I'd like to have you kind of take a self-assessment of where you are right now. Are you making a reasonable profit? Everybody's, of course, like to make more, but are you making at least a reasonable profit? Or is overhead eating your lunch? Are you busy? Or are you productive? And there's a huge difference. We'll look at how to measure that. Do most of your patients share your dental philosophy? And it could be high-end cosmetic practice, or it could be Medicaid practice, whichever suits you. There's no right or wrong. It's your philosophy. But do the patients match your philosophy, or is there always some friction and frustration there? Are you practicing by default or practicing by design? Most practices added employees over the years, a new office manager or whatever, and they brought some favorite tricks and ideas from their last practice, so you plug those in, and so you kind of grow like Topsy over time. And it's just a smorgasbord of things, and that's where I would say you're practicing by default as opposed to practicing by design, thoughtfully making some decisions. Do some of you feel trapped by your location? It was good 30 years ago when you built your office or whatever. Or have the demographics of your patient population changed? That type of thing. Can you pass the Monday morning threshold test? Here's a way to see if things are all right in your gut. So when you come into your practice on Monday morning, are you excited to be there? Anxious to get the day started? You look at the schedule. Are there a few too many patients on there that you know are going to ruin your day? That's important. You've chosen a tough enough way to make a living. And so we want you to be in charge of it. So in short, how's your quality of life versus the dental school dream that you had years ago? Certainly it was incomplete, it was naive, etc., but you had some excitement, plans for owning your own business, being an entrepreneur, owning your own dental practice, and being in charge. Well, now 10, 20, 30 years later, has life gotten in the way too much? Are some things in the way that perhaps you could change? Maybe like a battleship, it takes a mile to turn it around, but like they say, the best time to plant an oak tree was 100 years ago. The second best time is today. And so let's think about, can we get closer to what your vision was to that quality of life, and some things we can do. So there's one way to measure practice success, and I divided that into three columns. That is 3 P's: patients, production, and profit. So I want to break our conversation down into those 3 logical pieces. First of all, you have patients. Well, what's the vitality of the patients you have? You may think you have 1,800, 2,200, whatever, active patients. We use the ADA definition that would say an active patient is a patient who's been in your practice at least once in 18 months. And so if you were buying a practice or somebody was buying yours and you told them, in fact, that you have 2,000 active patients, is that sufficient, or would I want to look as the buyer a little deeper, and you perhaps as the manager, owner of your office, what's the vitality of those patients? Let's take a peek here. So we're looking at a fairly small practice that only has 983 active patients, but 364 of those have no future appointment. A third of the practice that's, quote, active has no future appointment. Let's peel back the curtain, though, and look a little deeper at what's going on here. Do we have 364 folks just waiting by the phone for us to call that haven't been in at all? Well, no. Up here we have 84 of those patients. They have had a broken appointment, cancellation, or their wait will call, unscheduled, quick fill, whatever. 84 of them are still pending. And I'm not going back 3 years to dig up this number. This has been within the past 6 months. You've got 84 patients out there. Broken appointment, canceled appointment. They've not since gotten rescheduled. Here's a biggie I would be worried about if I was buying a practice. There's 189 patients with no future appointment, but also they had fewer than 3 appointments in the last 18 months. Nobody looks at this, and you could dig this out of your reports in your practice management system. And so if I was buying a practice, I'm not sure I'd be thrilled with these folks. They don't seem to be practice building kind of patients. If they've only had 1 or 2 appointments in the last 18 months, they've technically passed the test as being active, but they're not in the ReCare system, obviously. They've not really been back much. So this is probably a figure looking at your maybe emergency visits, came in once to get examined, came in the second time to get fixed up or finished getting fixed up. So they're kind of one and done and gone. But technically,
would you
they're
agree
in the system.
that this is very powerful, important, peeling back of the onion or the curtain, as you said. Would you agree, though, that, if you're a prospective buyer and you have a great deal of confidence, and hopefully that confidence is backed by competence in terms of selling care and communication skills, that this could represent opportunity for you too, that maybe these patients have not really had the treatment presented or even diagnosed that might in fact exist in those charts, and therefore could just not spell opportunity.
Very much could be. Any of these cases where, let's say, we find there's a sorry ReCare system, is that good or bad? If you buy the most expensive house in the neighborhood with a nice white picket fence, it can't appreciate much more. But the big key, we've always coached clients for many, many years, if you're looking for a quote deal or value, are you buying a fixer-upper or are you buying a money pit? And I've had guys do both. Guys have bought a practice that was, had some defects in it, and they thought they'd come in here and fix things up, but they discovered the seller was a fantastic manager, great personality, been to a lot of CE, knows about practice management, and in spite of that, he had problems because, back to my question, are you feeling trapped? The demographics around him had changed. His location is no longer what it used to be, that type of thing. So yes, we'd have to dig deeper and certainly would not be unhappy at first blush if something smells funny.
But you'd have to have this data to know what the next step is. You may have an opportunity to do a traditional buy low and sell high kind of situation, but without this data, you really don't know.
Right. And we are capturing all this data in DentaMetrix, and some other programs may do that. But I wanted to emphasize and show you can capture these yourself if you are interested and get into your system. So this isn't a sales talk about DentaMetrix per se.
Sure.
But a number of practice due diligence representatives, dental CPAs, or on the other side of the table, practice brokers, a number of them use DentaMetrix to go in and extract this data for 3 years or so and have a feel for what their client's getting into or what does their client have to sell. And you may want to do this several years before you're the seller and clean up some of these things to maximize your practice value.
Right.
Okay, but like Vince said, if you're not keeping score, you're just practicing. So I'm showing you some ways to keep score. There's 91 people with no future appointment, but to add insult to injury, they have a future ReCare date, but they don't have an appointment. This could be, an airline pilot, student, military, something like that. I would suggest you up your communication skills at the front desk. So you've got an airline pilot that doesn't know their flight schedule 6 months away. And so the front desk say, Fred, I know you don't know your schedule yet, but I know you like to get in with Sally for your hygiene, and you like afternoons, and our schedule can get pretty full. How about this? Let me go ahead and put a placeholder appointment out there for you with Sally Thursday afternoon, 2 o'clock. That suits you? Oh, yeah. And then tell you what, 4 or 5 months from now, we'll call you, and then we'll renegotiate. You'll know your schedule. We'll move you around. But what your office has just done is similar to what the IRS does with you. Everybody knows their income tax return is due personal April 15th. The IRS really could care less whether you file on April 15th or not. Fact is, if you owe taxes, they'll make more money on you with interest and penalties. But your accountant's always told you, or somebody's always told you, if you're not going to file on time, at least file an extension. Why is that? That's so the IRS knows you're still alive and you're in their system, rather than wait for the airline pilot wandering around or flying at 35,000 feet to suddenly say, you know, I probably ought to call my dentist and schedule an appointment. What are the odds of that? As opposed to your computer system having them on your radar, you're in charge, you call in 5 months, hey Fred, how you doing? What's your schedule look like? Simple little thing, but keeps you proactively in charge of the conversation.
And keeps the patient engaged, for sure.
Yep. And they appreciate the reminder probably. And so here's the core active patients with future appointments. So the grand total for this office is 693. This 189 is not very engaged. Let's see if we can learn some more even about that. Let's look at new patient, enrollment in ReCare, and retention. You could do this again with reports out of your system. What percent of your new patients on average are enrolling in your ReCare program? 65%. I was kind here and had a goal of 85%, but between us, why isn't this 95% if you're a GP? You want long-term patients who want to take care of their dentition for the rest of their lives, save their teeth, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, that starts with the ReCare program and you being able to have an exam every 6 months. Why are 1/3 of the new patients not enrolling in ReCare? We're going to come back and talk about this some. There's several data points together here that will show us an interesting pattern. What percent of your patients are retained 9 months? What we do is go back 9 months ago and look at that specific cohort of 35 new patients that came in 9 months ago, and we track them over 9 months and find out what percent of those had at least 2 ReCare appointments. You should get a ReCare, say, in month 1 and month 6 or so. So 9 months, I gave them a little slack there because life gets in the way. So that's our definition of being truly retained. 9 months, they've had 2 ReCare appointments, 57%. Why isn't that 80%? How about retained 18 months? We want to see 3 ReCare appointments to call them a retained patient for 18 months, and that's only 28%. I'd like really 60% plus, again, if they were true lifetime patients to be in your practice. And so this is some interesting points that you're low on all these metrics, which is disturbing. Let's look at the overall status of your ReCare program. This is interesting, and you could put this together in Excel and get your own charts if you want to. Red is the number of patients who have never, ever had ReCare. That's not benign because, as you've perhaps heard in the past, probably 60 to 70% of your restorative and operative diagnosis is discovered in the hygiene room. Don't you think the local jewelry store or sporting goods folks would love to have floor traffic guaranteed every 6 months? Well, that's what you have as a dentist with the ReCare program. You get to take a look and see what's going on. Notice the red, unfortunately, is growing. This is one reason I really, even though I'm a CPA, truth be known, I actually like pictures better than numbers because it's clear here you can see the trend is going in the wrong direction without looking at columns of numbers. The gold are people who have been in the ReCare program, but they're more than 1 year past due. Super delinquent, we call it. Purple is delinquent, but less than 12 months. The pale green is those patients who do have a future due date. They're in the ReCare program, but they have no appointment. And we talked about 68 or so in that other slide. Notice here, though, it's shrinking, the yellow. You must have gotten the guys at the front desk talking differently to the airplane pilot, that type of thing. This dotted line shows you, using the right scale, what percent of the patients are leaving with a pre-appointment, I call it, of their next hygiene visit. And this scale does not start at 0, notice. So they're really doing pretty good. We'd love it to be over 90%, say, but they're knocking on the door in the high 80s. We don't know to what extent maybe some impact of COVID is still resonating in the system. That happens every 6 months in the cycle of ReCare. But it has been 2 years primarily for the main hit of COVID. And so I don't know how much longer we can keep beating COVID to death as the excuse for everything, including not enough cash in your checkbook. But there could be some ripples where you try to cram all the catch-up people into ReCare, and that just messed up your schedule. I would think that would have been filtered out by now, and after 2 years, you're pretty well caught up. But this is a fun way to look at your practice. And by the way, the height of this column, that is your total active patients. And you can see that growing some here. Here's where we might answer the question of why are we having a third of our new patients not signing up for ReCare? Why are they not sticking around? Why did we have 180 something that only had 1 or 2 appointments in 18 months? So look at this. Here's our net patients gain, new patients. So we had 40, 50. The blue is the reactivated patients. That is, they fell out of the 18-month window. So these are the good guys. So we're jumping up and down the hall, high-fiving. We had 45 new patients, 50 new patients, etc. But then if you plot the numbers, we say, but wait a minute. You lost 35 patients, 45 patients. Nobody is looking at this back door. The gold is where you formally inactivated or archived patients in your system. That's not really a high priority item to me because you have better things to do, including looking up, unscheduled treatment plans and things like that. And oftentimes you don't know for a couple of years until the patient doesn't show up that they are inactive, unless they officially requested their records. They moved away, perhaps they passed away. So this is really higher amount of gold than we would normally see. But what we do is we automatically essentially inactivate some for you. We can't use the term inactivated because that's a formal term in your practice management system, your Dentrix, EagleSoft, etc. So we call that phased out. These are the folks who fell outside of the 18-month window, and they're now 19 months or more before you've seen them at all. Here's my question that I pose to everybody, and without sounding too ugly, I'm saying or asking, whose fault is this? Who let these patients in the practice in the first place? Here's back to my self-assessment question. Are your patients generally in line with your philosophy dental-wise? They want to save their teeth, etc., maybe. Or it could be they're strictly pain-motivated and you just have an emergency practice. That's fine too. That's your philosophy. You'd expect to see a lot of churn like this. But the busy, and all the time you wasted in your chair and your PPE supplies, etc., you're busy, but I equate that to like trying to eat soup with a fork. We're not productive. We're busy. I suggest that you continue the idea of teledentistry, but not for the reason you think. About 1/3 of the purpose of teledentistry would be clinical. I wouldn't have the doctor waste his time on this, have somebody knowledgeable in the practice be the first person that's talking to them. And that person could always kick it upstairs to the doctor if necessary. But, one of your knowledgeable folks in the practice could see that they may need a crown or two, and there's some spacing issues and things like that. And so we say, John, it looks like the doctor might recommend that you have a couple of crowns here. We'll know better when you come in, and we'll know what kind of crown you need. And, most folks don't realize there's more than one kind of crown, and we don't know what you'll need before you get here. So that's 1/3 of the purpose of the teledentistry. The second third is I want you to make it a sales call to convince that patient that they want to come see you. As some folks have said, if I want to buy what you sell, why should I buy it from you? What are you giving me as a reason to come in to see you? Certainly a nice front desk, clean space, friendly staff, et cetera, et cetera. And so you want to talk about what you're doing with the COVID and the infrared radiation and HIPAA filters or HEPA filters and whatever else. Sell them on your practice and how sweet you are, et cetera. That's the second third. The final third, though, is what I'll call the triage third. I want you to have the conversation with John. It says, John, as I said, the doctor might suggest you need a crown or two. And for full transparency, John, our crowns run between, $1,200 and $1,600, depending on what kind of crown you need. And if John nods his head and says, okay, you've got a prospect that may be on your same wavelength. But if John all of a sudden turns white as a sheet, and John says, wait a minute, 2 exits back on the expressway, I saw a big billboard said, crowns $400. What do you mean $1,200 to $1,600? And so then John may not be a fit for your philosophy of practice. And you'll want to gently encourage them to let their light shine elsewhere. And look what you've just done. You just saved an hour of chair time and the PPE, because once John crosses the threshold of your dental office, the doctor has an ethical dilemma. He probably has to see him, take some time with him, etc. And so to me, that triage is going to get us on the path to finding patients who do match with your philosophy and not just taking anybody who walks in.
I'm glad you mentioned teledentistry, Rick. I think if there's a silver lining from COVID, that this is one of them, maybe the only one. But this is about marketing and running the race at the patient's pace, as well as being very efficient with your own time and resources. It can even help with case acceptance after the fact, because anyone in sales has heard the term the spouse objection. Well, when you're delivering the presentation, even after the fact, via teledentistry, the likelihood is that the spouse is going to be there and can participate in the meeting.
Yeah.
So I think teledentistry has been a boon, and many of our health partners are thrilled about it, and it's enabled them to be, as I said, much more efficient with their resources and time by really helping determine whether, as you said, whether the patient is a fit with your philosophy. And it really goes to the point about, are you selecting your patients, or are your patients selecting you? Mm-hmm. And that all gets into messaging, which is maybe a subject for another webcast.
Right. Yeah, we don't want them to select you just because you're the lowest price or you're in their insurance booklet.
Right. Not only because
that second third, where you're trying to impress the patient, that's where all of your teaching about the importance of initial impression, first impression, things like that come into play. And the person representing your office should be skilled in that type of thing, so that you're attracting the patients, but then at the end you finally decide, did you attract the right patient or should they go elsewhere?
Absolutely.
So nobody looks at the net patients gained and lost. And I would rather in this practice have you have maybe 15 to 18 new patients a month, but not lose but one. Look at the net impact. Look at the hassle factor. Look at the number of staff you need to have at the front desk just to handle the mass of humanity with scheduling, canceling, breaking appointments, blah, blah, blah. And so we could simplify your life. And this would be something you guys could track on your own, either by hand or in a spreadsheet in your practice. So that's all I was going to say in the patient area. Remember, the second column was production. You've got to be careful about how you define production. If I was a dental detail guy coming by your office showing you the latest dental supply gizmo or chemical or whatever, you'd be asking all kinds of questions. That's your area. You'd be very skeptical. You wouldn't let me come in with a black box and say, trust me, doctor, use this material and your patients will never have XYZ again. They're going to want to know what's in the black box, blah, blah, efficacy, who says so, show me some reports, blah, blah. But when it gets to practice management, if the ADA says the average production for GPs last year was, let's say, $350 an hour. Well, I've got a couple of problems there. What do they mean by production? Is that net PPO production? Is that UCR fee-for-service production? Or is that simply what they posted to the patient production? Because remember, all these numbers are coming in voluntarily from doctors who want to participate, and they've got a mishmash of the term production before they even get started. We want you to be tracking all three of those. What's your UCR production? 30 years ago, that was the gross production. This was before there were PPOs. You had gross production, you had preacher discounts you subtracted, and you had net production. Well, now you have a mishmash of fee-for-service patients who pay UCR and PPO patients who are paying the PPO fee. So there's no clean distinction of gross. And so we always ask a practice, what do you post to the patient chart or ledger in your office? And there's not a right or wrong answer. Until about 4 years ago, DenTrix, EagleSoft, and the others required you to post your UCR fee to the patient ledger because they use that number to then bill, let's say, Delta. Well, they finally copied what we're doing and said, wait a minute, DenTrix, you already know their UCR fee schedule because it's built into your system. They entered it. Why ask the doctor what they're going to charge? Bill Delta the UCR. And so a great sigh of relief went up from the bookkeeping office that now, as of 4 years ago, it was okay if you want to just post the net PPO fee. You got a $1,200 crown fee. PPO plan is going to pay you whatever, $800. You may want to go ahead and just post the $800 to the patient ledger. Most consultants would be sad if you do that, but that's up to you. Because what that does is saves you an awful lot of bookkeeping and adjustments every time the EOB comes in. I don't have a dog in that fight because I'm going to keep tracking your UCR production at UCR fees against your net PPO fees and keep rubbing your nose in that difference. Again,
you're going to be able to show the difference between production and collections, and that's a good indication of of how much you're leaving on the table by continuing to work with a PPO, or what's sort of your implied marketing budget, because you're sort of, that foregone income is a form of, you're paying to get in front of those patients. That's how much you're paying.
And what's worse, sometimes you're paying for mediocre patients who will only spend what their insurance plan will spend.
Of course.
So that's interesting.
Often.
So let's look at a couple of things under production here to see if you're actually busy or if you are productive. So this little practice. You have one doctor, two hygienists. The doctor is doing 69% of the total production, the hygienist 31%, and that's about right. In most practices, the consultants would love to see hygiene department doing maybe 25 to 30% of the total. But it depends on the style of practice. Again, is this a high-end fee-for-service practice? If it is, the hygiene department may be doing just fine, but they can't keep up with the huge $30,000 cases the doctor's doing. And so their goal might be 15% of the total production is hygiene, and proud of it. So don't just blindly accept this, quote, national benchmark of 25 to 30%. On the other hand, what if you're a Medicaid practice? Those folks oftentimes come to you, they're pain motivated, and they don't generally have interest in the ReCare program. And so it could be, hygiene could be 5% of the total production, but kind of for the wrong reason. It's not that the dentist is hitting it out of the ballpark, but the patients just aren't interested in that. So here's why we need to get behind the why these numbers look like they do. We're looking at the production per day, 4,400, 1,600 for two hygienists, so half of that for each of them, say, and production per hour. And again, this would be the UCR production, not the net PPO production. In your office, you can use your own per day or per hour, but you can't really compare this to one of the other doctors in your study club or down the street, because you don't know how many hours do they have in a day. Maybe they're working 10 hours a day, 6 hours a day. Per hour, how many hours do they have a day? And more importantly, how many chairs do they work out of? If you're working out of one chair and they're working out of 3 chairs, they better produce a lot more per hour than you do, and vice versa. And so these time-related KPIs are good internally. You know you've set a goal, let's say, of $4,000 per day. You know if you are ahead or behind your own goal, because you know exactly what production per day means. And it looks like the doctor's doing pretty well per hour. Goodness, 584. Remember the ADA said 350, whatever that means, because we don't know how they define production and what kind of practices were responding to the survey. But look at this. He is working out of 3 chairs. And look at the production per visit if you want to compare to the other guys in your study club. 187. That's kind of low. This guy's on roller skates running 3 chairs to get that 584 per hour, 4,400 per day. The per visit tells the story. The per visit doesn't change whether you have 1 chair or 3 chairs or 10 hours in a day. We know how many bodies you see, how much are you producing per visit, and that's what we want to compare to a benchmark or your study club or something like that. Look at the hygienist, again, 2 of them. So half of that is $113 per patient visit. That's pretty good. Adequate. They're not doing probably as much perio as they could, so it'd be higher than that, but that's not a bad figure per hour, or rather, per visit. And so this is important to know the per visit. Quit focusing so much on per hour and per day, at least as far as comparing to other benchmarks outside your practice. So all three of these have their place. How about your procedure mix? What are you doing? Let's see. We break it down into 10 procedure categories. We ignore the ADA's 12 categories, and I'll explain why in just a second. But this shows you how much you're producing per month. Had a heck of a March. It's a shame we can't reproduce that all the time. But the blue is the perio. Green is preventive, so green plus blue really is hygiene. The gold is fillings. The red is lab, or rather crown and bridge, and the silver is other. We'll explode that in just a second. But the reason we have our own categories is, let's say crown and bridge, 2750s, etc., is in that category the ADA has, but how about an implant-supported crown? That's a whole different category according to the ADA. Well, we said, no. You just care in general, how many crowns are we doing? How much are we producing with crowns? You don't care what kind of crown. Your consultant wouldn't so much care about whether it's an implant-supported crown or a 2750. So we can break the rules and lump those together into crowns, bridges. So you got crown and bridge, fillings, hygiene is green, perio is blue. And look at this as a side note. Hygiene, green plus blue, is about 32.5% of total production. The other number we showed was probably a year to date. And so this could be a different time frame, could be the recent month, etc. But notice this, perio is 16% of the hygiene. And that's why the hygiene is doing pretty well. Consultants and good benchmarks would suggest they'd love to see perio more 25 to 30% of hygiene would be perio.
Yeah, that's
related.
what I'd heard. But yet you think this is a pretty good number to the 16.4?
Well, I wasn't quite finished. 16.4 is not bad because most practices I see that haven't really focused on hygiene, perhaps even had a hygiene consultant come in, they're at 5%. So this practice is apparently working towards the 25-30%, but without a champion in the hygiene department or a consultant that's really focusing on that and the importance, it'll be 5%, 4%, 6%, that area. Miserable. And so we kind of harass the doctor and say, oh, you guys must have especially clean water in your part of town. Because
I mean, when you
we
consider what
don't see
percentage
numbers that low. If the CDC or whoever it is right and said 80% of the world has some degree of perio involvement, then shouldn't
why wouldn't
be 5%.
Your practice be representative? Yeah.
Another item we look at that I haven't shown here, and you could easily do, we ask the question of patients who ever had SRP, scaling root planing, in your practice, what percent of those had 2 or more 4910s, perio maintenance, rather than 1120 or whatever it is, 1110. We find that down in about the 20 or 30% category. They say, doctor, this could be a lawsuit waiting to happen. One of the fastest growing areas of legal work in the dental community is supervised neglect, especially when it comes to perio. And you're going to be in the plaintiff's chair, or the witness chair, and the plaintiff's attorney is going to say, doctor, I see you only do perio maintenance on 20% of your patients that had scaling root planing. You'll say, oh, no. We actually do perio maintenance, but the insurance plan is going to mark it down and make it a 1110, so we just call it a 1110 anyway. Oh, so you're doing a 4910, but you're calling it a 1110, so you're also committing insurance fraud. Which category do you want to be in? And so my point is, if it's truly 20%, that's sort of like the old-fashioned orthodontist with bands. He debands you after 2 years and forgets to mention retainers. When you do an SRP, you're bound to maintain that with 4910s. Remember, a 1110, the definition includes that you're working on healthy tissue. So which is it? Is it healthy tissue, or was it compromised SRP grade tissue? And so if you continue doing what you're doing, doctor, at least have tremendously good notes in the file. We did 4910, insurance downgrades it, whatever, but don't have what we normally see, a miserable 20-25% officially doing 2 or more 4910s. Danny, does that make sense to you?
It does indeed.
So if Danny and I can understand the big words, surely you guys on the call can as well, okay? So make sure you don't leave yourself open, because you know you lose patients. You're in California and a patient moves to New York. Well, guess what? The dentist in New York has a hungry brother who just got out of law school and looking for some action. Don't let them catch you with 20 years of x-rays in your files, documenting to the 4th degree supervised neglect. So keep really good notes. Don't fall off the other side of the fence too. As Danny said, 25-30% is a normal range. What if you're at 50%? If I'm buying that practice, does that pass the smell test? That's way out of line compared to normal, and that's where you've seen perhaps some hungry dentists down the street treating patients to game the system to make some more money, and they've come to you for a second opinion, and you're discovering somebody down the street is trying to cram a resin in 2-millimeter pockets. That's where the patient's getting abused. Likewise, that 30% of the total practice should be hygiene related. What if 50% of the practice is hygiene related? We always tell a professional like a CPA or a dentist, your first response to many questions should begin with, it depends. It depends on what? Are they over hygiening the patients? Or is this a 64-year-old dentist who's got 1 foot out the door? He's more interested in his 3 o'clock tea time at the golf course. And so he's not only watching single units of crown and bridge. I had one of my clients years ago. He was even watching 4-unit bridges. House was paid for, the boat was paid for. We'll look at it next time, Miss Johnson. And so the hygiene department's not overworking. It's that the restorative operative side of the house, your side, doctor, is underperforming. And so percentage-wise, that skews the hygiene, and the technical term for that is prophypallus. Back to Danny's question, is that a good buy or not a good buy? Well, look, think of all the crown and bridge that's not being done, man. We look in the charts, there's not much crown and bridge mentioned, and I had suggested to a study club years and years ago that might be a good buy because there's a lot of potential crown and bridge there. One of the doctors in the back said, Rick, I disagree. I would rather see a lot of crown and bridge mentioned in the charts so you know that crown and bridge is spoken there. How do we know that any patients who really wanted some crown and bridge, much less implants and some fancier things, maybe they knew that this doctor referodontist that didn't do anything and referred everything out, he didn't do crowns, didn't like to do crowns, and they already left. So the only people left behind are the ones who are not interested in crown and bridge. Mm-hmm. So the sword could cut both ways.
Sure.
Let's look at explode the other area. And here's where you have red as exams, you have dentures, surgery, ortho, endo, etc. For a periodontist, he would say, Rick, why are you showing crowns? I haven't done a crown since I graduated 30 years ago. I said, right, let's modify the program. You do soft tissue grafts, right? Oh, yeah. So let's count that instead. Or you do implants. Let's count that instead of crowns, whatever. This big red chunk is the hygiene exam. And we suggest the hygiene exam not be included in that 25 to 30% production for the hygienist. If you do include that, which is in the minority from all the practice that we see, you simply have to raise the hygiene goal to perhaps 35%, not 30%. So up to you. We can do it either way you want. So this is showing where else your income came from. So that's the procedure mix. We can look at how many crowns do you do compared to large fillings, 3 and 4 surface fillings. If you do 30 crowns for every 100 fillings, large fillings, then we'd say that's a 30% ratio. If you only do 10, that's pretty low. 30 to 40 or 50 may be okay, but we have some practices that are 150 crowns for every 100 fillings. That'd be 150%. High-end cosmetic practice will be 400%. They don't do many fillings. So that's a ratio you could look at and track in your practice. And Dr. Charles Blair, that many of you are probably familiar with, does a lot of work in the procedure mix and things like that. That's sort of an intensity study he does to look and see how many crown buildups do you do, how many crowns do you do per fillings and things like that. And so those are some other things we look at that you could look at yourself. So how about case acceptance? We look at it by dollars and by counts. So acceptance by counts should be higher than by dollars. So 74% is not too bad for this practice. We would think the goal should be 85%. Acceptance by dollars is only 33%. Whoa, what's going on here? Remember, our professional answer always starts with, it depends. This doctor may have gone off to an Invisalign class, came back all eaten up with Invisalign, so he treatment planned Invisalign for 2/3 of his patients. And of course, 90% of those said, you're crazy. And so look what that did to his case acceptance. If a whole bunch of folks turned down a $6,000 Invisalign case, that really knocks your numbers down. What if we saw 95% case acceptance by dollars? That's fantastic. And so I was talking to this gal, perhaps, or a gal like her with only 33, 25%. I said, Doc, come on, we got to get it back in gear here. And she'd say, well, Rick, remember, we're a high-end cosmetic practice. Most of my cases are $30,000. That guy doing 95% case acceptance, we discovered all he was treatment planning was buccal pit amalgams. So, Rick, would you rather have 95% of buccal pit amalgams or 25% of $30,000 cases? So you can see why I hate averages. In general, if you had your feet in the oven and your head in the refrigerator, on average, you feel okay. But what does that tell you about the whole picture? And so you need to get behind these numbers. Why are they what they are? And really, this person's goal should perhaps be 30% and not 40%. But one thing we looked at here, average presented 954, that's not terribly high. Average accepted 582, so this obviously is not a high-end cosmetic practice. So why are they at only 33% based on dollars? We also look to see how much treatment planning is outstanding in your system, and we don't want to insult you and go back and look 20 years. Let's just look at less than 12 months ago they were presented. This is pretty fresh stuff. This practice has $528,000 of outstanding treatment presented in the last 12 months that hasn't been accepted yet. You can run this number out of your reports. Okay? So that's case acceptance. One thing we do is, or I should say, what we don't do is we don't really want to get into telling you what your case acceptance was yesterday. We could tell you that, and you could check that box on your checklist of how to buy a software program, but we'd say that's as crazy as you looking in your QuickBooks and trying to track how much were my dental supply cost yesterday. I would argue that window's too narrow. You had Bubba in the chair, and you treatment plan Bubba for $10,000 to do his front grill, the front 8 teeth, say, not even just 6. What are the odds of Bubba jumping up and saying, well, heck yes, we'll do that. When can we start? I would bet if Bubba has any sense, he's going to go home and look at his checkbook, maybe talk to his spouse, probably drive past the sporting goods store and look at the bass boat one more time. And so a month or two later, he'll finally make his mind up and accept that from yesterday. Well, yesterday's acceptance rate would be useless. So what we do, you could do this too. We go back and look to see what was presented 4 months ago. And so it might be March. So we go back and look at March and see what was presented. We would then look to see those specific procedures, because they have IDs inside of Dentrix and EagleSoft, etc. We would look to see what was presented in March and what got appointed in March or April or May or June. So we use a 4-month moving window, thinking that probably 85 to 90% of what's going to get accepted probably gets accepted, including Bubba, in my example, in that 4-month window. We think that's a smarter way to go. In fact, we do that using artificial intelligence, whether or not you actually use the treatment planning module properly in your software. And believe it or not, almost 80% of the practices we look at don't use the treatment planning module. And so that's curious. So we could tell you yesterday, we can tell you month to date, but we have a checkbox we suggest you check, asking us, go ahead and use your 4-month rolling average, Rick, and let's see what the trend is. So that's how we would do that. Moving on to the profits area. By profits, I mean how good are we at getting gross revenue to the bottom line. I'm not rehashing here what you and your accountant would do looking in QuickBooks, looking at your overhead, looking at dental supplies. We discussed that last month in the webinar, and if you send Danny a note, he'd probably send you a link to the recording of that. So we tore that up as how you should redesign your QuickBooks, maybe to make it more of a practice management tool than a tool for the CPA to do tax returns with their profit and loss. They need the P&L, but you really need more of a cash flow report. And we discussed that last month. We call that dental cash flow for dummies. So shoot me a note or shoot Danny a note if you'd like to get some more information on that. So we're looking at the revenue side, not cutting the expenses down to get the profit done that way. How do we get our gross revenues working? So how much of your production at standard UCR fees is collectible? Danny mentioned collections compared to production a moment ago, but let's break this down. Remember, there's 4 different uses of the word production. We've got the fee-for-service fees. We've got the net PPO fees. Here's where we have insurance write-offs. We have regular adjustments. This would be the preacher discounts, friends and family, things like that. Then we have the net collectible fees, and that's what we want to measure collections against. We can't hold the front desk responsible to collect UCR fees. if you've got PPOs and the company and stuff like that. So here's the net collectible, and your collections here were 95% of net collectible, and you'll hear a traditional benchmark of about 98% tossed around. And again, you've got to be careful, percent of what? And so it should be net collectible. But notice the 800-pound gorilla in the room. Here's the largest expense in your office that's not in your QuickBooks P&L. You don't write a check for this, but you left that money on the table. That's the contractual difference that you accepted between UCR and what the PPO company is going to pay you. And that's a huge number. We see twice this in some practices. 50% of your production, 28%, isn't terribly bad compared to many. We have ways to talk about, should you try to get out of PPO plans, and we don't sell in-house discount systems and things like that. That's what a lot of folks are doing on the internet, espousing getting out of the PPO plans, but let me instead sell you an in-house program. Those are fine if you want to do that. Or you could simply do a 10% across the board reduction in all fees if you're a member of the Smile Club, or whatever you want to call it. And the Smile Club says you'll get the discount if and only if you come in twice a year for your cleaning and checkup. And so they got a little skin in the game. I'd rather give 10% across the board and not have to deal with PPOs and have the patients coming in twice a year for a quality experience in the practice and long-term care. So there are different ways to do that, and there are different ways to have conversations to go ahead and plan to get rid of the PPOs. We have case after case after case that's done that very successfully because, one, hopefully, your patients love you much more than you realize they do. Two, your patients are already driving past 10 other dentists to get to you. The patients that share your philosophy in many cases don't come to you because you have Delta. They'll use Delta if it's there. But we consistently see cases after they've had communications with the patients for a while, 6 to 9 months, they drop Delta or the others, and a year later, 80% of the Delta patients are still in the practice. You're not nearly as beholden to the PPOs as you're afraid you are. You've got to do some work. You'll have to have your practice operating on all cylinders, get your systems in place, get these KPIs in place, get your marketing in place to attract the kind of patient you want and you need, but you need fewer of them. So that's a whole different conversation we could have. But let's look at the PPOs. This is what we call the PPO analysis wizard. We're showing you, perhaps for the first time, total Aetna in your practice. What's your exposure? How many patients is that? What percent of your patient mix is Aetna? As you probably know, you don't have one Aetna. You've got 137 Aetnas because each of the employers in your practice, they have their own Aetna plan. So you've never seen all of the Aetna pulled together unless you've worked at it. So we did this for you, total Delta, total Aetna, etc. We're showing you the net PPO fee, regardless of how you do your bookkeeping. We also show you the UCR gross I had mentioned. You have long since forgotten about this, especially if you let your staff post the net PPO fee to the patient ledger, as I suggested. You saved all that bookkeeping. You saved all these huge adjustments you used to have to make, but now this is out of sight, out of mind. Neither you nor a practice management consultant, if you have one, can see this huge adjustment. And so we show you the gross, to keep reminding you what the true write-off was. And we do that for the top 10 plans in your practice. You could plot this manually the same way and update that every month to see what's going on. Another thing we like to do is let's do a fee analysis of your 10 sample codes, probably the most popular codes in your office. We suggest you do it at least the 80th percentile, maybe the 90th percentile. You're not getting into elite territory here. Let me explain. All the national fee databases we see, especially the ones that brag about getting to the nearest zip code for you, they really mean, if you read the fine print, they'll get to the nearest zip code using the first 3 digits of your zip code. Well, in Atlanta, the first 3 digits probably cover a 50-mile radius. The rich part of town, the poor part of town, all points in between. This picks up Medicaid practices, high-end fee-for-service practices, etc. So this is a mishmash. This isn't nearly as scientific as it looks, but that's why I say, since that database is kind of lame, I would shoot for the 80th, maybe the 90th percentile, and get a lot of that other garbage behind you, and don't be lulled into the fact that it was run for, quote, your zip code. Yeah, yours, nobody else within 50 miles. And so in this practice, we showed about $25,000 loss just on these 10 codes at the 80th percentile, and we were smart enough to only apply this calculation to their fee-for-service patients. We know the PPO could care less if you want to change your fee schedule or the insurance plans. So we don't insult you and look at all of your patients. We just looked at those fee-for-service that would actually respond to the fee increase. And so what we do is we take about 30 of these things. We've looked at about 10 profit leaks. We have about 30 we look at, and we do a profit leaks report. And for this practice, we discovered potentially $837,000 of net leaks after write-offs. If they could do certain things, reactivate patients, and stuff like that. And so that's about a 5 or 6, 7 page report that looks somewhat like this. And it has some text to go along with it. And this is sort of the highlight of one of the modules we have that we've been going through here, showing you all the KPIs. But those of you that like football at all, and even those of you that don't, have probably heard the phrase or the saying that defense wins games, but offense sells tickets. Offense puts points on the board. Offense adds excitement. What we've been looking at, including this high-level profit leaks report, tells you where you are, where you've been, how did you get here, what are some potential opportunities. That all really is sort of in the category of defense. We have the online version that's updated every 15 minutes. That's the offense. And that's especially loved by the office manager for day-to-day operations, where we have a smart daily huddle that for each of the patients who come in that day or who are coming in or tomorrow, we show not only the patients coming in, but we also show about 12 alerts. Hey, these folks have had a broken appointment in the past. These folks have a birthday. These folks have a medical alert. These folks have never been in a ReCare. These folks' appointment is not confirmed, etc. But we also show what's the total family accounts receivable outstanding for this patient coming in. So Sally Smith comes in, and we know the total accounts receivable for her family. We also show what's the total outstanding treatment plans for the entire family. And we show when the last continuing care date was, the last FMX, things like that. So a lot of information in one place. But the hygienist could have a casual conversation with Sally when she comes in. Sally thought she was just coming in to get her teeth cleaned. Sally, my bookkeeper tells me that y'all have about $600 balance outstanding with the office. You want to take care of that today when you're leaving? Sally may say, no, my husband does all that. Say, okay. So if you would, please remind your husband when you get home. Yeah, sure, I'll be glad to do that. Well, Sally, while you're talking to your husband, I see here that 5 months ago we suggested he needs 3 crowns, and we haven't heard back from him. So would you ask him about that too? Because we're concerned that some teeth may start moving or something like that. And so Kathy, or not Kathy, the hygienist, just made a low threat, zero threat sales call as well as collection call, just stating the facts. He's not selling anything, but just think how useful that information is to have at your fingertips. And what folks really do is the day before, each hygienist, say, and each provider, doctor, looks at just their patients coming in tomorrow and the alerts and the outstanding treatment plan, the outstanding accounts receivable. So in the morning huddle, you have some real meat to talk about. And so if the hygienist, or let's say the doctor, sees somebody coming in tomorrow with a big restorative operative case, $5,000, he sees the alert, hey, that appointment is not confirmed. Another alert, the lab has not been received. Another alert, this patient has been known to cancel on short notice before. I think I would send an Uber around to pick up that patient personally tomorrow. But you know that in advance and on the spot. And so that's actionable business intelligence that you can use to grow your practice. And so what I'd like to do as a live webinar attendee, I'd like to do a complimentary profit leaks analysis for your practice if you'd like. We do that for DenTrix, EagleSoft, and Open Dental. So that covers about 85% of the waterfront. And here's my contact information, rick@DentaMetrix.com. I'd love to do that for you. It just takes about 10 minutes for us to get on a workstation, not the server, but a workstation with an admin person in your office, maybe the office manager, certainly not wasting the doctor's time. This is just a mechanical function where she sets up a quick join.me type of meeting. We take over the mouse, download an app like you would on your iPhone in about 10 minutes, and automatically does the extraction. There's no HIPAA information. No information is displayed. It's just quietly extracted, and then we get the report back to you. So we'd be happy to do that for you to see what profit leaks we find in your practice. And now let's see what questions we got. Danny, what you got over there?
Sure. Well, we've got several, but that sounds like a truly painless extraction you're proposing.
Well, that's a good point. I should market it as such.
I was going to ask you what was involved in, because I know we had talked about, obviously, before the presentation that you were going to offer this complimentary profit leaks analysis. It really does sound painless, as long as the representative of the office can provide you with temporary access to one of the major practice management systems. You can extract this information, and then how do you present it? What do? You generate a report of some sort, I assume?
Yeah, we actually curate the information, first of all, to make sure it passes the smell test and see if we're not missing anything. And then we make some notes, and then we send that back to the practice, and we go over it online and do like a 1-hour view on the screens and talk about it.
That's terrific.
Yeah,
that's a great offer. I hope that everybody in attendance takes advantage of it, because they've got nothing to lose and a great deal to gain. So we thanks again for terrific. We covered a lot of material, and we've got a few minutes left here for questions. The first one is, I am confused. Tell me again the difference between gross, posted, and net production, please.
Okay. So you've got $1,500 UCR standard fee. You've got, let's say, a $800, $900 PPO fee according to the schedule you have, and that's what you post to the patient's ledger. And that's fine as long as you and we know what your technique is. You don't post the UCR fee. Probably these days about half the practices still do. Half will post what I'm calling the posted fee, the net PPO fee, to the patient ledger. And so we know how to talk about the overhead and things like that. If you are only focusing on the net PPO fee and not the true UCR fee, then that makes a big difference as we look at your numbers and ratios and KPIs and how much you're, quote, producing per day. Was that at standard UCR rates so we can compare that to other clients? Or is this net PPO fees that are useful internally, but I can't compare your net PPO to the guy down the street because he may have half the PPO participation you have. Okay?
Got it. Yep. Thank you. That's very clear. Next question. Again, why is production per patient visit a better figure for comparing productivity with my friends rather than just production per day or even per doctor?
So as I'd mentioned before, there are too many variables if you do per day and per hour because you don't know how many days they work, how many hours are in a day, or how many rooms they work out of. If you're comparing to Dr. Smith, is he working out of 3 chairs or 1 chair? And so that's why it really boils down to the gold standard is production per patient visit.
Okay. Why is there such a wide range of case acceptance figures between practices, especially if measured by dollars?
Well, that's what we mentioned at the time. What kind of things are they presenting? If they're presenting low-hanging fruit, buccal pit amalgams, well, anybody can sell that, right? Or are they presenting $30,000 cases? That may be a little steeper hill to climb. And so we would expect perhaps different results. And so I'm always suspicious if their case acceptance is too high. That's where we dig in. Are they really taking a risk and presenting some big stuff?
Yeah.
And in
or
fact,
are they playing it
example,
safe and resting on their laurels with the taking solace in a high percentage, but it's a high percentage of a low number.
Yep.
Absolutely. Okay. If a doctor's schedule is always full, why might they still need practice management and marketing?
Well, as I mentioned, you can have a full schedule, but is it productive? I often tell folks that I would think the scariest position to hold in the typical dental office is that of the schedule coordinator. And that's so terrifying because she knows if the doctor ever comes up front and sees a hole in the schedule, she's going to be toast because he does not want to see a hole in the schedule. And the fact is, it could be he'd rather see junk in the schedule than a hole in the schedule. I'd rather you have a hole in the schedule and go look on Facebook, do some of your CE studies, read your journals or whatever, than waste your time on some rinky-dink procedure. It's sort of like there's an unusual way they capture a certain kind of monkey in South America. They know the trail through the jungle the monkey usually habitats or goes through, and they put a little cage in the middle of the jungle on the floor where that path is, and the cage is not for the monkey. They put a banana inside the cage. Monkey comes tripping down the trail, sees the banana, sticks his hand through the bars of the cage, grabs the banana, and tries to get his hand out of the cage. Well, he can't get his hand out while he's holding on to the stupid banana. And the monkey is not going to let go of the banana. 3 hours later, Bawana Jim comes by and drops a net over the monkey, and that's how they catch him. And that's sort of the equivalent of you having junky, trashy stuff in your schedule. Yes, you're full, but again, was it productive? You got the right procedure mix, you got the right fees, have the right philosophy, or is it just a bunch of buccal pit amalgams? And I would not want a practice full of patients who won't spend more than $1,000 a year because that's all their insurance covers. So if you want to get more productive and or even get out of the PPOs, that means your practice can't just rely on volume. You've got to be hitting on all cylinders. Have a good team, and all your systems are in place, stuff like that. And that's why you have to have a marketing plan in place to get the right quality patients that you want. I use the term quality reservedly, but the patients who have the kind of philosophy you have. Now, if you have 15 chairs and 6 associates, you may not have to care because you need high volume to fill those chairs. And if you're making whatever, 10% override essentially on 5 associates, you being at the head of the multi-level marketing scheme, you're doing just fine. I may hate to be one of the grunts down in the galleys, you know, slaving along at PPO fees, but in such a case, you've made a success over a volume. So there's not a right way or a wrong way to do it.
Right. That's absolutely true. All right, final question, and this might take a little time. How does your system compare with others in the dental field, such as Seekosoft, Dental Intel, etc.?
Those are all quite good systems. We refer to them more as retail systems because they're sold directly to a lot of dentists and stuff like that. They're very attractive. They have a lot of sizzle. But a lot of consultants turn to us, dental CPAs turn to us, sophisticated practice administrators turn to us because the analytics aren't terribly robust. They can't tell where the numbers are coming from. If they scratch behind the sizzle, sometimes they don't feel like they have found much steak backing up the sizzle. And so they think of us more as a professional strength tool because of our CPA background, and yet we also have all the patient management information with the smart huddle and all the delinquent patients and the list of patients who left yesterday without a pre-appointment, things like that. And so we just have a lot more depth, I think, but those are all very good programs.
Sounds like you go the extra mile to be as proactive with your analyses as possible so that you can, as you use the term, come up with actionable intelligence, which is
right.
Very consistent with our philosophy too.
Right.
We have a dashboard, as you know, and it's the same approach. We want to provide leading indicators, not lagging indicators, you know, to show you what
right.
happened. We prefer to show you what could be if you
what's
take the proper steps.
And
exactly.
By the way, nobody else has that PPO analyzer wizard like we have. A lot of folks love that if they're going to have a conversation about which plans to drop and how many patients are impacted and stuff like that.
No, that's excellent for sure. All right. Well, let's move on to concluding remarks here. In a few days, you all will receive an email with instructions on how to apply for your CE credit. Again, please note that the code for this course is WIL 052622. That's today's date, and WIL for Willeford. But it's in the order, WIL 052622. You will need this code to request your CE, so please be sure to write it down. I now invite you to mark your calendars for Thursday, June 30th at 6 p.m. Central Time, when the special guest presenter will be Dr. Bill Kimball, whose presentation is titled, Get Your Life Back. Let your practice be the lever that restores balance in all you do. Bill is co-founder of the Build Up Group. He's also president of Kimball Consulting, Inc., the founding partner of Integrity Practice Sales, and lead wine educator at Find the Right Wine. So I'm sure he'll weave some interesting stories and advice, guidance on how to balance your life with some fine wines, no doubt. Attendees will discover blind spots most dentists suffer from, learn details about 7 proven systems that save time and increase profits, discover how to slow down and produce more, gain confidence in becoming insurance-free, learn 3 key traits needed to ensure a cohesive team, create a plan to increase your enjoyment of dentistry, quality of care, and take-home income, discuss strategies to take more time off and reach your goals each month, and most important, see real examples of dentists like you achieving all of the above. It all happens on Thursday, June 30th at 6:30 p.m. Until then, this is Danny Bobrow thanking you for your ongoing commitment to practice perfection. Goodbye, everybody.